Welcome to the Living Loud and Proud podcast, brought to you by Disability Pride, Pennsylvania. If you need a link to the transcript for this episode, please visit our accessible website at www.disabilitypridepa.org/podcast. And now, here is your host.
Hey folks, welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Living Loud and Proud podcast. Today's topic is centered around the development of prosthetic limbs from ancient times to now. I'm your host and producer, Phill Rosen, today, and I'm joined once more by my co-producer, Ray DECA Horton. Ray, how's it going?
Hello folks, how's everybody doing today? I'm doing great, Phill.
Oh, that's awesome. So to get started here, I want to preface this by saying that this is distilled from my research into this topic. This is a very broad topic, and I cannot give a full history here in one 30 to 60-minute episode. And I'm honestly no expert in any of this, so please take all of this with a grain of salt. But I think for the purposes of our podcast and like learning about the history and some of the people who have developed these devices over time, this is going to be really fascinating and interesting. So without further ado, let's press on and learn a little bit more about the history of prosthetic limbs throughout history. Are you ready, Ray?
Yeah, well.
All right. So the first historical record of prosthetics, like any mention of them, originate from the ancient Near East, circa 3000 BCE. Now, when I refer to the ancient Near East, we're talking Iran, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Anatolia, the Armenian highlands, the Levant, and the Arabian Peninsula. Basically, the Middle East and Northern Africa.
Right, got it.
So the earliest evidence or earliest record are from ancient Egypt and Iran. Specifically, the Eye of Horus story from ancient Egyptian mythology is one of the earliest recorded mentions of eye prosthesis. That's circa 3000 BCE or so. And in this story, real quick, it's just the left eye of Horus was plucked out and restored by Thoth. Or Thoth. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. I'm so sorry to any ancient Egyptian scholars out there.
Oh, trust me, it's almost subjective, depending on who you're talking to. But wait, so are we saying that there might have been actual glass eyes going on as far back as 3000 BCE, or just a thought or referencing of, eventually someday doing something like this?
So there's no archaeological evidence in ancient Egypt that I found record of in my research, but I have a feeling that they probably had access to maybe, enameled metal or wood, something like that. And they would probably fashion these. What?
They probably did it with some of the mummies.
Oh, yeah. Oh, for sure. I'm sure they did. So, they did have some ability to at least think about this and probably did actually practice this. But we don't have any evidence of anything physical.
Okay.
The earliest archaeological evidence was from ancient Iran, circa 3000 to 2800 BCE. So this is still, 5,000 years ago at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy long time ago. And it was an eye prosthetic that was buried with a woman in Shahr-e-Sukta, likely made of bitumen paste covered with a thin layer of gold. I assume the bitumen paste probably deteriorated to a point that they were unable to, find it. But there was gold in the eye socket, I guess.
Got it.
So, really fascinating stuff. Egyptians were pioneers of foot prostheses. There was a mummy that was found that had a toe made from wood and leather.
Wow.
In the New Kingdom, that's circa 1000 BCE or so. It has been reproduced by biomechanical engineers in 2011, and it was found to allow both the use of sandals and walking barefoot in ancient Egypt.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Really, really interesting. And then the oldest discovered prosthetic limb was an artificial leg from a grave found in Capua, circa 300 BCE. So this is ancient Rome or the Etruscans, somewhere around that. Probably ancient Rome, actually. The Etruscans were a little bit earlier. And then there's no sign of an artificial foot, but there's some speculation that it was made out of say gold or silver or some other precious metal at the time, and it probably got stolen by grave robbers or taken off the body by whoever was digging the grave.
Yeah.
Now the original limb was destroyed in World War II during a German air raid of London that destroyed the Royal College of Surgeons in London.
Yeah.
It was housed right there. And unfortunately, the Blitzkrieg and the air raids, was really destructive and horrible. Anyway,
the Nazis weren't stealing it; they were blowing it up.
Right, exactly. And then I want to kind of jump back a little bit in time to go to South Asia for a moment, India. And circa 1200 BCE, the Rigveda mentions Vishpala. Now, the Rigveda is a Sanskrit hymnal, it's a collection of poems and mythologies.
Got it.
And Vishpala, in this text, lost her leg in the time of night in Kila's battle, or there's an alternate translation of in Kila's race, eager for a decision. They, which is referring to the Ashvins, who were the Hindu twin gods associated with medicine, health, dawn, and the sciences, gave her a leg of iron so she could keep running.
Okay.
Now, the reason why I mentioned the two different translations is because Ralph Griffith interpreted it as a female warrior in battle.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, Carl Friedrich Geldner interpreted the horse race instead of the battle. There's not really any additional information that survived about the characters or events mentioned, as typical of many of the poems and hymns in the Rigveda. So, all we have is just this mention of it, and that's it. But I thought that was an interesting thing to kind of put in there.
Yeah, there'll be a Netflix anime with Bollywood that'll come out probably in the next few years. So we don't have to worry about it.
Are we sure it hasn't already happened? I'm not a huge fan of Bollywood movies myself. So let's move on to ancient Rome. And we're going to really just quick talk about dental implants and dental prostheses. So there were bronze crowns that have been found from ancient Rome. There's some debate as to whether they were aesthetic or if they were medically necessary crowns.
Got it.
Right.
Ancient Rome equivalents of having a grill.
Basically, yeah. They were likely attached to the tooth using a paste that contained phosphorus, carbon, and calcium. And the reason we know that is because these crowns were covered in this paste.
Right.
So that leads us to believe that. And then there's also a mention in the histories. This is ancient Greece, by the way.
Got it.
Circa 430 BCE by Herodotus that mentions Hegesistratus, a Greek diviner for Mardonius during the Greco-Persian Wars. Now, Hegesistratus was originally an Elean. He had been captured by the Spartans and bound, basically kept as a prisoner of war, right? And he escaped by cutting off his own foot.
Oh, okay.
And he later replaced it with a wooden foot. Later, he got captured and executed by the Spartans. So his life did not end well, but again, this was ancient Greece. There was a lot of war on the Aegean Peninsula at the time.
Right.
And all around the Peloponnesian Sea, honestly, or Aegean.
The Roman Empire version of Saw.
Basically, well, Greek. But anyways, and now I want to kind of talk a little bit more about like the development of wooden and metal prosthetics. So we're going to go back to ancient Rome, and we're going to talk about the Second Punic War. So Marcus Sergius Caelus fought in the Second Punic War. This was a war that lasted between 218 to 201 BCE. Anybody who knows about Hannibal and the Alps, this is that war.
This is the one with the elephants and everything.
Yeah, they crossed the Alps in winter.
Okay.
And I'm going to read a little quick passage from Pliny the Elder in Natural History, published in AD 77. Nobody, at least in my opinion, can rightly rank any man above Marcus Sergius, although his great-grandson Catiline shames his name. In his second campaign, Sergius lost his right hand. Although disabled, Sergius served in many subsequent campaigns. He had a hand made of iron for him, and going into battle with his bound to his arm, raised the siege of Cremona, saved Placentia, and captured 12 enemy camps in Gaul, all of which exploits were confirmed by the speech he made as praetor when his colleagues tried to debar him as infirm from the sacrifices. There's more discussion of his exploits in battle, as well as his imprisonment by Hannibal for 20 months. But, you know, not really relevant to what we're talking about here today. But interesting guy. If you want to learn more about, you know, the Punic Wars, fascinating read. You should do it.
Right.
And now we're going to kind of jump into the 6th to 8th century AD. So there was an Italian man who was found. There was a skeleton found with a knife in a Longobards cemetery in Povegliano, Veronese. Man, I am butchering all these names, I'm sure. This man was estimated to have lived in the 6th or 8th century, somewhere in that region AD. And he had an amputated hand, and he replaced it with a knife.
Okay.
And materials suggested that the knife was a replacement for his right hand, attached with a leather strap that he tightened with his teeth many times. So there was a lot of bite marks in the leather.
Right. Okay.
And so on.
Got it.
And now we're going to move forward several centuries to Götz von Berlichingen. But in 1504, during the War of the Succession of Landshut, Berlichingen lost his right arm at the wrist when cannon fire forced his sword against him. What I interpret that to mean is his sword basically was cut off his hand.
Yeah.
So there were two mechanical iron hands that were made for him. One was made by a local blacksmith, and it was like a very, very simple, like, you know, just enough to like kind of grasp a couple of things here and there, not too much articulation.
Right.
And then there was a second that was capable of holding a shield or reins. I believe this one was made for him by a mechanic in his army.
Okay.
And he continued his military exploits after losing his hand until 1544, and then he died in relative peace in the 1560s. I don't have the actual date, at 81 or 82 in Hornburg Castle.
Okay,
So,
now, are we to understand that this was somebody back in the 1500s that lived to age 81 or 82?
yes.
Man.
I mean, he was a noble, right? He was a knight. So
He still lived long, even for them.
I understand, but if you get past the diseases,
Yeah.
and you're relatively wealthy and well taken care of, you're going to live pretty long, regardless. But so he's a really, really interesting figure. He was a mercenary too, so he would pick and choose battles based on like what lords wanted his favor or needed his services. Now we're going to move on to a couple of Frenchmen. Francois Delanoux, who was nicknamed bras de fer, which means iron arm.
All right.
Yeah. He was a Huguenot captain injured at the siege of Fontenay in 1570 by a bullet that shattered his arm. The arm was amputated later, and a mechanic of La Rochelle, his army, made him an artificial iron arm with a hook for holding his reins. And then we're going to also talk about Henri de Tonty, who is nicknamed Man de Fer, Iron Hand.
Okay.
He was a captain lieutenant of the Maitre de Camp in Messina, losing his hand in a grenade explosion, later replacing it with a metal hook covered by a glove. Interesting little tidbit about him. He was tasked with exploring North America by the French government. And he did it with René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle, who was supposedly reported to have an iron hand, but outside of the Wikipedia page that I found that on, I could not find any evidence of it.
Okay.
He did not have any injuries requiring the use of prosthetics, I guess, is
Got
what
it.
I could find. Also, fun fact about René Robert Cavelier is the LaSalle explorers are named after Robert Cavelier, despite the university being named after a Jesuit
yeah.
priest.
Oh,
So,
that's pretty cool.
fun fact about Philly institutions.
Well, that worked out in favor and everything. And, come on. These guys had superhero names back before they existed. So that makes it even better for, the explorers, Hey, we were named after the first superheroes. All right.
I do want to mention that, these men all had hook hands.
Right.
And I just want to mention, because there might be some people out there thinking about Captain Hook. I certainly was when I was researching this.
Yeah.
Not commonly attributed to inspiring J.M. Barrie with the character of Captain Hook. But when I did research this, I did find a portrait of Henri included in a blog post about this.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Yeah, definitely.
There's a lot of references to Captain Cooks in J.M. Barrie's discussions of the play that he wrote. So, I presume he was probably more inspired by British people, but you never know.
But that leads right into, basically like what the next point that you were getting ready to point out, how most of these prosthetics, well, they were built for holding weapons, shields, and, you're in your notes is talking about shields or stabilizing mounted warriors. Yeah, like you said, the reins of as you were mentioning the guys earlier, I'm like, hey, everybody made sure they still were riding their horses.
Well, horses were a very important part of battle.
Yeah,
So, of course. And, they had, legs that would, connect to the saddles as well for those who needed it. And only the wealthy could really afford functional prosthetics that had like real articulable like fingers and other joints that really are useful in daily life. But all of these first appeared in the 1500s. So, at least in terms of the more modern articulable ones. And then we're going to kind of move on to like some of the other pre-20th century ones. I don't have dates for these listed in my notes here, but only because it just would take too long to talk about all of them.
Yeah.
So there was an Italian surgeon who recorded the existence of an amputee with a functional prosthetic. The arm that he mentioned in his notes allowed the man to remove his hat, open his purse, and sign his name. All things that were very important at the time, for anyone in Renaissance. Like this was early Renaissance Italy at that point. So, those are all important things to do. And then there were improvements in amputation surgery and prosthetic design that came from French barber surgeon Ambroise Paré during the mid-16th century. this guy's fascinating, by the way. He's kind of like a mad scientist surgeon almost.
My favorite.
Well, he actually had like all sorts of different things that had nothing to do with the amputations as well. Like he came up with certain things that had to do with obstetrics and gynecology.
Okay.
So like, and he was using the scientific method before it was really like functionally talked about in science.
Yeah, I got it.
So, but he championed the move away from using boiling elder oil and cauterization to clean amputation sites during surgery, to using a mixture of egg yolk, oil of roses, and turpentine left overnight on the wound. And this was because turpentine has properties that allow the wound to stay cleaner, whereas the boiling oil and cauterization would often lead to shock in the patients.
Got it.
And he reintroduced the ligature of arteries in place of cauterization. So I guess from what I was reading that like in the Middle East, when they would amputate limbs, they would tie off the arteries to staunch the blood flow.
Right.
And we lost that during the Middle Ages, essentially. So he created the bec de corbeau, which is a crow's beak, which is a predecessor to modern hemostats.
Okay.
So he documented phantom pains in amputees. So he's like the first person to really kind of talk about phantom limb syndrome.
Right.
And he also developed a kneeling peg leg and foot prosthetic with a fixed position, adjustable harness, and knee lock control, as well as some ocular prostheses made from enameled gold, silver, porcelain, and glass. So this guy was like a crazy inventor, constantly innovating in medicine and surgery.
Yeah, I see.
And by the way, this was all in the 16th and 17th century. So long time ago, long before we even think about modern medicine in a lot of ways.
And he helped pimp out pirates too, evidently. Because, now we're finally hearing about the peg leg. You've been there, look.
Exactly. So other major improvements pre-20th century, and I'm just going to go bullet point on this. Peter Verdun created the first non-locking below-knee prosthetic limb.
Oh, wait, what do you mean by non-locking?
So instead of with regards to Paret's prosthetic, it would have locking joints so that there would be stability in the limb.
Got it.
This doesn't lock necessarily, or doesn't need to lock.
Right.
To have stability. James Potts created a prosthesis made of a wooden shank and socket, steel knee joint, and articulated foot, controlled by catgut tendons from knee to ankle.
Okay.
And this became known as the Anglesey leg or Selfo leg. Now, these were pretty crude. The tendons were actually on the outside of the limb, which I'm sure anyone listening can understand how that might be non-ideal for the durability of the device. But, later that got reworked by someone else.
And
Sir James... Sorry.
No, I was saying, it was just the one that was using cat guts?
Yes.
I guess dogs really loved that one, walking by.
It wasn't unusual at the time, too, to have catgut strings for stringed instruments as well. So,
okay.
Little bit of music history there as well. Sir James Syme developed a method of ankle amputation that did not involve amputating at the thigh. So basically, he pioneered below the knee amputations.
I did not know that was a problem. So, oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Benjamin Palmer improved the Selfo leg that we just mentioned earlier with the catgut tendons on the outside by adding an interior spring. So there's a spring on the back and concealing the tendons to simulate more natural looking movement. This is a big deal because up until that point, I mean, we've seen all the pirate movies with the peg legs and they're laying around. This allows people who are using these devices to more easily blend in and not necessarily have people know, oh, you are injured in some way.
Right.
Which that really helps with the stigma that a lot of people feel when they have devices like this. Dubois Parmelee created a prosthetic with a suction socket, polycentric knee, and multi-articulated foot. Now, the suction socket, is important because this is like the first like real sort of change in how prosthetics were attached to the limb, and it allowed for more comfort.
Okay.
And the multi-articulating foot, I don't think I need to explain that one to anyone. It makes a more natural looking ankle movement.
Right.
Marcel de Sutter and Charles de Sutter developed the first aluminum prostheses. So this is like the first like real reduction in weight of a prosthetic limb.
Got
Huge
it.
deal. And Henry Heather Bigg and his son Henry Robert Heather Bigg were commanded by Queen Victoria to provide surgical appliances to wounded soldiers after the Crimean War. Now, the Crimean War was like mid-19th century. They developed arms that allowed double arm amputees to crochet.
Wow.
And a hand that felt natural to others out of ivory, felt, and leather, among other prosthetic limbs. And they also developed an early mechanical treatment of limbs and the spine. So, like, when we're talking about that, think about, like, rods to support the spine.
Right.
For, like, scoliosis or something like that. And then, like, screws and metal plates for, like, other parts of the body that, need a little more support.
Got it.
Injury. So this is, like, the first real modern sort of, like, medical devices that were starting to be created at that time in terms of things that get left in the body.
And I always thought the concept for these didn't come until the 20th century, but here it is.
Yeah. No, this is very fascinating stuff that we're all talking about here. So I couldn't really find too much new developments until post World War II in terms of like the way in which prosthetics were attached to the body or, put together, created, manufactured. So we're going to just jump right ahead to the 1940s.
Yeah. And just as a footnote, it's not surprising because looking at how all these advancements were happening so early, in the previous millennia, my God, we should have been, well past that advance. So I'm noticing a trend here where it seemed like they seemed to stop thinking about the development of it for long stretches of human history,
Right, or our records about it.
Yeah,
are incomplete, potentially. Also, no pun intended on the footnote, right?
Oh, wow. How about that? Okay.
Yeah. Anyways, the National Academy of Sciences here in the U.S. advocated for better research and development of prosthetics after World War II ended, which led to the development of a research and development program within the Army, Navy, Air Force, and the Veterans Administration that helped to fund improvements in prosthetic technologies. And the Veterans Administration, by the way, was fairly newly created at this point.
Right.
I believe FDR, don't quote me on that, but I believe FDR was instrumental in the creation of the VA. Obviously any Army historians are going to come at me with pitchforks and bayonets if I'm wrong.
Right.
But
about who? But they definitely will, co-sign with you on it wasn't around as early as it should have been.
Yeah. A team at UC Berkeley, including James Fort and C.W. Radcliffe, helped to develop the quadrilateral socket, which was like developing a jig fitting system for amputations above the knee. And just a quick note about sockets. We're not going to go in depth on sockets. we could talk for 5 episodes about sockets alone. So like there's a lot of stuff about this out there. But really, we're just going to talk very quickly about a few of them that are very notable and are still used today. So this particular socket, the quadrilateral socket, is a rectangular shape to help distribute weight bearing across the ischial tuberosity, which is the lower back pelvis or lower back butt bone.
Got it. Okay.
Right? And the gluteal muscles, your butt. The socket was attributed by Fort to Eberhardt and his team from Germany in 1949. Now, unfortunately, I don't know who Eberhardt is. I could not find any record of him outside of the paper that James Fort published.
Astounding.
So, yeah, it really is. Another pun there, too. We got, what is that, 2 now?
Okay, that one was intentional.
Yeah. Now, socket technology improved further in the 1980s when John Sablich, CPO, invented the contoured, adducted, trochanteric, controlled alignment method. What a mouthful that is. Or the CAT-CAM socket. It evolved into the Sablich socket. This kind of followed a direction from some previous pioneers in socket technology. Ivan Long and Oscar Christensen, who were developing alternatives to the quadrilateral socket in the 1970s. And I actually read a little bit of one of their papers from 1974 talking about this.
Right.
So, they were doing research from the 60s into the 70s about this. They created an open-ended plug socket, basically, that was made from wood that helped to better distribute the weight evenly over the existing limb and lock in the bony anatomy containing the muscular tissue. So basically, this is something that helped with things like pressure sores and comfort, as well as allowing for better articulation of the muscles that is still there.
Yeah.
And better support the bones that, didn't necessarily have the weight distribution the way that it normally would be, stay in place a little bit more. So as we all know, that's huge when it comes to anything disability related.
Yeah.
But especially with something like this. And all of these developments, by the way, they led to the broad adoption of ischial containment to help better support lower limb amputees if needed. Again, supporting the butt bone.
Right.
And other notable contributors to socket development include Tim Stotts, Chris Hoyt, and Frank Gottschalk. And Gottschalk, in particular, disputed the efficacy of the CAT-CAM socket alone, insisting that the surgical procedure done by the amputation surgeon was most important to prepare the amputee for any type of socket design. So this is really just, from what I gathered here, it was just essentially it's more comfortable based on how things are cut. It's kind of like, in the sound design world, garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
Same concept here. So there are several types of socket designs. We don't really have time to talk about all of them here in this episode today. There's so much detail here that we could literally have an episode on each type of socket if we wanted to, just talking about the differences about it. So we're just going to go real quick through the categories. So we have the transfemoral socket, which is above knee, the femur, as many might understand, the transtibial below knee socket, the Syme socket, which that goes back to talking about James Syme.
Right.
The knee disarticulation prostheses, which those are like through the knee. So like anyone who has a partial knee amputation, they'll probably get something like that. There's also below elbow prostheses. So there's the transradial prosthetics is like a category of that. There's the transhumeral prostheses, Not funny, but it's above the elbow.
Oh, God.
The partial foot prostheses. So that's like, anyone who had like a partial foot. Actually one of the historically an NFL kicker who for the longest time had the longest field goal of all time, Tom Dempsey, I believe his name was, had a partial foot.
I did not know about that. Was that considered illegal?
Well, so what happened was he kicks that long field goal. He had a half shoe basically with a steel plate at the front. And the owner, I believe it was the owner of the Cowboys at the time, I don't know if it was Jerry Jones yet, went on this whole crusade about how that was super illegal, and they made a rule that required that any shoe that was used by a kicker had some sort of like more natural prosthetic.
Right, got it. Okay.
Because he was like, oh, there's no way he would have kicked that far if he didn't have a steel plate there.
Yeah, you know what? I might have to agree with that.
My problem with that is he's actually at a huge disadvantage because when you don't have half your foot, your balance is off.
Yeah, but he was kicking with the foot that had the metal, right?
He was, but again, he didn't have any of the feeling of like, say, the toes or any of that. So that actually would be a huge issue from that perspective. So I don't know. I think it might be a wash.
He might not be a football kicker, but he was definitely golf kicking.
Well, they also were kicking in a different way than they do now. You know what? I'm not even going to get into that right now. That's
a whole other podcast. But anyway, where did you leave
kicking has changed since then. All right, so now we're at the hip disarticulation and hemipelvectomy prostheses. So these are like, they take out your pelvis essentially.
Yeah.
And they put a fake pelvis in there. Hybrid prostheses. So these combine socket and suspension methods. So like, I don't know when this would be useful. I'm not an amputational surgeon or an orthopedist by any means, but I imagine this is when someone has like a very complicated like amputation that requires a couple of different things to allow for the better functionality and comfort.
Right.
Then there's suction sockets, which I feel that's self-explanatory.
Yeah, we've already got,
pin lock sockets, self-explanatory again. And then copolymer liners, which those are like soft liners that improve fit and comfort. Again, big thing to deal with pressure sores, to deal with swelling in the limb, especially lower limbs, because lower limbs are more prone to the swelling than upper limbs, just by way of gravity.
Yeah. You know what? It's so funny because, all right, and all this was just basic mechanics. So it's so crazy because I'm realizing this is probably, especially for those of you who are like into sci-fi and fantasy and all that other stuff, you could definitely, comfortably say that steampunk, design and art was definitely influenced by this.
Oh, and for sure.
It's so funny because as Phill was rifling off all these different terms, names, developers, and all that, I realized I actually was familiar with some of this because early exoskeleton designs were developed from this stuff, like the early mechanical ones, not the ones that, have servo motors, just straight mechanical design. Some of you may have been privy to see it, throughout the last century, especially the latter half, going like with the 60s, 70s, and 80s and everything. But they weren't usually that very practical. Plus, you also had to be practically an athlete, not a full athlete, but practically an athlete because they were mechanically driven, which meant they also were powered by whatever muscle tension you had. But yeah, these were like a lot of the designs there. And some of them, I dare say, probably were some of these different types of socket designs probably sprung from those earlier exosuit or exo frames, or influenced them too.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually want to just mention here real quick, I did not have time to really get into like athletic prosthetics, because that's a whole nother
that deserves its own.
But there's a lot of fascinating stuff in the development of all of those types of limbs and other devices to help athletes better perform. But anyways, let's move on to the 1990s to today. And as Ray was kind of alluding to, this is when we first start getting like computer chips, microprocessors in limbs. So the first microprocessor controlled prosthetic knees became available in 1993. The first one that was like mass marketed and like commercially available was called the Intelligent Prosthesis. It was released by Chazé Blatchford and Sons Ltd of Great Britain. And it made walking feel and look more natural than previous prosthetic designs. And this gave way to their next model, the Intelligent Prosthesis Plus, which was an improved version released 2 years later in 1999. And then the Adaptive Prosthesis, also released by Blatchford and Sons, was released in 1998. This one utilized hydraulic controls, pneumatic controls, and a microprocessor to allow better response to changes in walking speed, basically allowing for more natural movement. So it's not as jerky when you're changing speeds. And this all led to kind of an evolution of the prosthetics program here in America. The Evolutionizing Prosthetics Program is what it was called, funny enough. It was created by DARPA in 2005, the same people that gave us the internet, y'all. And the goal is to develop an advanced electromechanical prosthetic upper limb with near natural control that would dramatically enhance independence and quality of life for amputees. That is a direct quote from the FDA's website, or from the FDA, by the way, on this program. So very important, as we can all see based on that. And in 2014, the Luke arm was developed. And our friend Dean Kamen is back. Say hi to Dean, everyone. His team at DECA Research and Development Corporation created the first prosthetic arm approved by the FDA that translates signals from a person's muscles to perform complex tasks. So, this is like, there's always in the 20th century, there had been like very many mechanical developments that had allowed for better articulation of fingers and limbs, like small digits. But this was like the first real leap forward into something that was more natural and allowed for better grasping of objects, especially, to make sure that they don't drop out of the hand randomly.
Exactly.
And Johns Hopkins University and the U.S. Veterans Administration also participated in this program. So there's been a lot of collaboration on this to try and make these prosthetics better for especially veterans, but for anyone who needs them. Excuse me. And then in 2019, we start seeing the development of the Amparo confidence socket, which is made of thermoplastics rather than like using a plaster cast, like for like metal or whatever material that they were made out of before. This is a project launched under AT 2030. I'm not sure exactly what that stands for, but I assume that has something to do with accessible technology, given the AT. And this is a huge leap forward because the fact of the matter is that the technology that was first created with the microprocessors and the better articulable legs and joints were estimated from 1999 to be up to $1 million per prosthetic limb in 45 years from 1999. So that would be 2044. So this is something that allows for a much faster development of each individual limb, and they're significantly less expensive to produce.
Yeah, I just looked up AT 2030, and that is their goal. Yeah, life-changing assistive technology for all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, huge leap forward. Huge leap forward here. And this is just going warp speed now, I think. And now we have we're moving on to future development and design trends. So, of course, the lighter, more durable, flexible materials, if we want to talk about like our previous episode on wheelchairs, carbon fiber, for the lightweight kind of material, silicone, which like makes for a better skin, more natural feeling skin. Yeah. And then advanced polymers that also improve the look and feel of the limbs and the skin. The polymers would be the outer layer. The silicone would be more like the muscles inside, from what I could gather. And like I said, in tandem, these improve weight, look, feel of natural limbs and the skin. And this allows for the reduction of stigma because it's more comfortable and helps people blend in. So less eyes staring at people and whatnot. And then we also have Bionics and Myoelectrics. These are kind of robotic arms, right? Utilize sensors to detect electrical signals from muscles. These are converted into motions to allow users to control the limb using their natural muscle contractions, with greater control over it compared to the mechanical solutions in the past, which improves the functionality, improving the range and fluidity of movements available to users. This is especially important with regards to grasping fragile objects or walking more naturally. And like when we talk about grasping fragile objects, I have seen videos of people with these bionic arms trying to hold eggs. And sometimes the arms, they fail and it is not pretty.
Yeah.
There's a lot of egg on your face.
Yeah. And pun intended.
Well, no, I mean, literally, I'm not even joking.
Yeah, literally.
And then the last kind of development that we can think of for the future would be integrating AI into these limbs. So
yeah,
this is like machine learning, very basic AI.
Yeah.
They learn the habits of the user over time, improving the functionality. And they can provide real-time adjustments based on the movement that someone is using at the time based on their past history. So this would allow for more natural motions from analyzing the gait, grip, and other patterns of movement.
Yeah.
So like we're really in a place where like prosthetics may not look all that different in the very near future from a natural limb.
Yeah. And well, it's so funny because, going back to like what you've talked about, with these last few points, well, I wanted to talk about, 3D printers, but before I get to that, I was reading something where like one of the things with AI integration with this is they're trying to come up with the new data set or something where it's more subjective towards the individual and the learning localized, specifically like the AI portion becomes a part of your brain. Not necessarily I don't think they mean that they want to install a chip in there, that is used standalone. But something damn near close to it that's standing right next to you, figuratively standing right next to you.
Don't give Elon Musk any ideas for Neuralink.
Yeah, right. No. And going back to about 3D printing, it's so crazy because about 4 years ago, I can't remember if you got the chance to meet the guy, but we met at Gay Pride and Philly Pride, a gentleman who actually 3D prints his own prosthetics. Well, he doesn't have an arm, and he's kind of like into cyberpunk and everything. So he's been literally 3D printing, regular static and also slightly mechanical, forearm and hands for himself, and his designs are great. I don't know if I should be concentrating on the science of it or the art of it, but yeah, and it's so crazy because these things actually exist. What they call it for 3D printing, the designs that you download for the DECA.
Oh gosh, I can't remember.
I forget what the name is, but yeah,
it's not
the designs, the plans. There are like tons of groups out here, forums where you could go and collaborate or download these designs that someone's given, and just make the proper adjustments for size and fit, and it's like so crazy if you've got the money or access. And you don't need something that's like, in the microprocessor range and up, hey.
Well, and assuming Star Wars is correct, we're going to be very close to having a Luke Skywalker style hand soon.
Oh, right. How about that?
Again.
Yeah.
A long time ago in a galaxy. Okay, I can't do that anymore. But
yeah, no, don't.
You get the point, everyone.
Yeah. Or the final remake, the final reboot for $6 Million Man, $60 billion man.
So yeah, this is really interesting to talk about, and honestly, go out there and research more of this, people. If you really are enjoying this discussion, because there's so much to learn here, there's so much to mine, and maybe you could be the next person to design something new or to change the way this design is. So
yeah, we now have the technology where, the average person can do it. Like I was mentioning the gentleman whose name I wish I could remember.
Yeah. Well, everyone, thanks for listening in. This has been such a great topic to talk about and research, the history of prosthetic limbs specifically. If you liked our show, please share it with your friends and family, anyone you think might enjoy it. And, let us know how we're doing. Tell us. Anything else you want to talk about, Ray, before I fully sign off? Okay.
Good luck, everybody.
Well, that's it, everyone. Thanks for listening in. Until next time, have a good life.
Yeah, what he said. All right, folks.
All right.
Please visit our accessible website at www.disabilitypridepa.org. You can find us on social media at Disability Pride PA on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok.